Hello, this is the oral presentation by Natalie Hindle for Assignment 5, Gesture and Meaning. This was the assignment brief given in the course guide. I've included it within this presentation to give you an idea of what was required for this assignment. What is fine art photography? Fine art photography can be quite challenging to define. What actually makes a photograph fine art is debatable to many. Fine art is an idea, message or emotion that is conveyed through the image of the artist. Fine art photography captures what the artist's vision is, not the camera, as opposed to other mediums of photography, like photojournalism, which documents what is in front of the camera. What is classed as fine art photography can be somewhat confusing. What differentiates fine art photography from other forms of photography? With fine art photography, the artist uses the camera as a tool to create a work of art that is less about the subject in front of the lens and more about the artist's vision. First, let's talk a little about the history of fine art photography. Up until the 1960s in the UK, photography was not recognised as an art form, although there were many successful attempts leading up to this point to change the way the art world viewed fine art photography. Although photography quickly became popular in the 1820s, it was only ever considered to be a craft as opposed to an art, mainly due to the technical aspects of the camera, and for this, photographers were recognised as technicians as opposed to artists. An early example of fine art photography is the work of Julia Margaret Cameron, who was one of the most significant female photographers of the Victorian era. Julia Cameron came from a wealthy background and was known for moving around within middle-class circles, and many of her portraits included well-known actors and celebrities of that era, including scientist Charles Darwin and British poet Alfred Lord Tennyson. Cameron would often invite friends, family and her servants to pose with her within her dramatic scenarios and portraits. Quite often her subjects posed in biblical and historical attire, in imitation of the romantic and pre-Raphaelite paintings that were popular at that time. Her portraits were distinctive and dramatic, and she was one of the first photographers to use a system of purposely giving her images a soft focus for a dreamy effect that was often criticised by critics as technical incompetence. Although not recognised at that time, today it is clear that Julia Margaret Cameron had an ability that the commercial portrait photographers lacked. Her portraits appear to be influenced by that of a spiritual content, looking beyond the technical aspects that were expected within a portrait and focusing more so upon a spiritual beauty within the scene or the subject. The beauty of her compositions and her dedication to photography as an art form earned her considerable admiration. At a time when Victorians could not decide if photography was a science or an art form, Cameron was fiercely determined that her images would be accepted as paintings were. Within 2 years of taking up photography, after being given a camera by her daughter, Cameron had sold and given her photographs to the South Kensington Museum, which is now the V&A, and in 1868 they made her the first artist in residence. In 1892, the Photographic Society of Great Britain was offering no support for the progress of photography as an art, instead only emphasising on the technical and science involved. This led to many members of the Institute withdrawing their membership and joining photographer Henry Peach Robinson as they formed the Link to Ring Brotherhood, which also included women too. Robinson was a portrait photographer in the mid-1850s who used combination printing that was inspired by Ruslander's The Two Ways of Life. One of Robinson's most known pieces is entitled Fading Away, a stage scene made from 5 combined negatives showing a young girl on her deathbed surrounded by her family. His images altered the concept that the camera equals truth, challenging commonly known beliefs that only artists such as painters should have the capability to create and fabricate scenes to bring them to life. Robinson's beliefs were soon to be accepted by the art community, and he went on to promote this further in books and in articles. In 1869, he published Pictorial Effects in Photography, which became the most popular photo textbook in the 19th century. He went on to teach other photographers how to use their mind's eye and to think like painters, as well as techniques for combining negatives to achieve the desired look. Alfred Stieglitz was a photographer who promoted the modernist movement in art and almost single-handedly altered how photography was perceived as an art form. Stieglitz was self-taught, and through this he saw photography as an art. He wrote many extensive articles about photography and also won many competitions for his images. In 1892 he became the editor of Camera Notes, which was a periodical journey of the New York Camera Club, and in 1894 became a member of the Linked Ring. Stieglitz's journal CameraWorks was the first photojournal in which the focus was not primarily on the technical aspects of photography, but was instead a focus on the visual art. The images within CameraWorks are truly beautiful, and many of them possess a haunting melancholy quality to them that tells a story of eras gone by. Stieglitz was always interested in photography as an art form and dedicated many hours standing in a snow blizzard for his image Winter, 5th Avenue, October 1905. In the cold, hard wind and snow, Stieglitz patiently waited in hope for something to come along that would create a picturesque image against a snowy backdrop, and we can see here that that's exactly what he managed to achieve. The snow blizzard combined with the contrasting tones creates a very uncomfortable, haunting feel that gives us a glimpse into the reality of the world as he saw it at that time. Stieglitz's theory for his work believed that the main focus of the image should be sharp in focus, while the secondary elements within the image should be out of focus. He called this naturalism, as he believed this process would best resemble the way a human eye sees things. So you can often see this throughout his work. The main element will be sharp in focus, while the background drifts away. Stieglitz quoted, "Atmosphere is the medium through which we see all things. In order, therefore, to see them in their true value on a photograph, as we do in nature, atmosphere must be there. Atmosphere softens all lines. It graduates the transitions from light to shade. It is essential to the reproduction of the sense of distance. The dimness of outline, which is characteristic for distant objects, is due to an atmosphere. Now, what atmosphere is to nature, tone is to a picture." We can also see this here in spring showers. The tree being the main focal point is sharp in focus in the foreground and contrasts against the rain showers that throw the background out of focus. We see quite often throughout his work that the weather is quite a critical aspect for Stieglitz to create naturally occurring atmospheric moments, like in this image and in Winter, 5th Avenue. In 1902, along with others, Stieglitz formed a group called the Photo Session. The purpose of this group was to advance photography as applied to pictorial expression and to gather those interested that were already doing so or interested in pursuing. The group believed that photographers should manipulate their images in the darkroom in order to give them their own unique vision to their images. The manipulation would take form in the effects of focus, creative printing processes, and other processes to achieve the desired look. The steerage marked a turning point for Stieglitz, and he began to focus on photos as photos in their own right, instead of focusing on the idea that photographs should resemble a painting. In this image, Stieglitz was fascinated and inspired by the scene before him. Observing the men, women and children on the lower deck of the steerage, he was suddenly presented with shapes of all kinds, from the narrow stairway leading to the upper deck of the steerage to a round straw hat. He saw shapes that related to each other, which represented his feelings about life. This gives us an insight into how Stieglitz saw something in his mind. His vision for the shapes and social conditions were united here to create an image that is now deemed to be one of the greatest photographs in history, as it was one of the first works of artistic modernism of that time, and also served as a formative document. Stieglitz's photographs are recognised in their own right. However, his biggest contribution to art is his determination throughout his life to promote photography as a fine art. The scene or subject of fine art photography goes beyond the literal representation of what it is. Expression from the artist is what makes each fine art image unique in itself. It is an outlet for artists to express vision, feelings, and to portray their own interpretations of the subject in front of the lens. For example, there is a beautiful landscape and two photographers. One photographer will be photographing for a client for advertising purposes, taking photographs of the landscape and the scenery around it. The other photographer is wanting to capture the essence of the landscape and will wait patiently for as long as he or she needs for a break in the clouds when the sun shines down and hits the landscape in a beautiful way, or until something else enters the scene to give it that added element of beauty. This photographer's work will be classed as fine art, as the photograph began with an artistic vision and steps were taken to create that vision, as opposed to the first photographer who is simply photographing what is before the lens. Fine art photography covers a range of genres, from portraiture, landscape, to nudes. The artist pays close attention to the detail, lighting, focus, and pose to achieve their vision. Over the years, fine art photography has overlapped into many different genres, including commercial photography too. However, this has been done with careful consideration and with the intent of the artist's vision more so over the client's. Photographs that were taken for newspapers and magazines have often appeared on the walls of galleries and museums. Dorothea Lange is a perfect example of fine art documentary photography. She is best known for her Depression-era work, working as a photojournalist for the FSA, the Farming Security Administration. Her most iconic image is Migrant Mother, which gave face to the suffering people in Pomo. In an intimate portrait, the viewers can see and connect with the migrant mother, whose gaze passes a camera in deep thought, and whose children cling to her with their backs to the camera. The message here is clear and provokes an emotional response from the viewer, as we can feel the desperation. In a tightly cropped frame of just a mother and children, we don't see the surrounding living conditions, and we really don't need to. This image speaks volumes in terms of desperation and helplessness. Lange's work could be defined as documentary. The image of migrant mother shows a real person with her children, facing and experiencing real, genuine struggles. However, Lange is an art photographer, and she shows us this through her images by honestly communicating her experiences of the Depression-era work through intense and emotional images. Although the line between documentary and fine art photography runs thin between Lange's work, Lange, although commissioned by the FSA, was incredibly passionate about provoking change. Her images were taken with the expression of her vision and how she wants to show the world what was happening. White Angel Breadline was Lange's first major image that showed her sense of compassion and ability to structure the image through composition and lighting, which aided in enticing the viewer's emotional engagement. In Milton Meltzer's book, Dorothea Lange, A Photographer's Life, when Lange was asked her what her feelings were when she observed that man on the breadline, this is what she quoted. "I can only say I knew I was looking at something. You know, there are moments such as these when time stands still and all you do is hold your breath and hope it waits for you. And you just hope you will have time enough to get it organised in a fraction of a second on that timepiece of sensitive film. Sometimes you have an inner sense that you have encompassed the thing generally. You know then that you are not taking anything away from anyone, their privacy, their dignity, their wholeness." If we compare this image of migrant mother to other images taken by documentary photographers, we can see the difference between basic documentary and fine art documentary photography. Another example to show the difference in what defines fine art photography are these two portrait images here. The first image of famous Liz Hurley and fiancé Shane Warne was taken purely for commercial purposes. The photographer was commissioned to take this image for the front page of Hello magazine. As we can see, it's a standard portrait of a famous couple looking lovely and glamorous and intended for the readers of Hello magazine. The second image was taken by famous photographer Annie Leibovitz. Now, similar to the first image, Leibovitz was commissioned to take this image of the also famous couple John Lennon and Yoko Ono for the Rolling Stone magazine. Although the outcome was to be the same, we see both images are entirely different. Yes, the date gap between both images is 32 years, which we could argue makes quite a bit of difference. However, the time gap is not what makes these two portraits very different. It is the vision of each photographer who took the images. The first portrait has no meaning or emotion behind it. It is a simple, glamorous portrait of an A-list couple. The second portrait has no glamorous lighting or clothing on the celebs. In fact, John Lennon poses nude, as you can see in this image, making it a bold, strong and stunning image, much like their love for one another. It captured the essence of their relationship, giving the viewers a true and honest look into their love for one another. Lennon stated that the image captured their relationship perfectly. This image was made more poignant by the fact that Lennon was murdered only hours later. Looking at both images side by side, you can see how the image of John Lennon and Yoko Ono is classed as a fine art portrait, as opposed to the first image, and why this image appeared in many galleries and museums over the years, when the first image has not. Looking at contemporary fine art photographers, there are so many to choose from to talk about. However, I will choose a few that I personally find very inspiring. First, we have Gregory Crewdson. Born in New York in 1962, Crewdson's images produce very psychological and dramatic narratives that complement the aesthetic beauty. His images touch the viewer on a very psychological basis. He is very interested in the uncanny, and using this, composes beautiful and unique images, telling stories through light and colour. Most of his images usually take place in small towns in America. His images are often very deep in meaning, and it's figuring out that meaning that draws the viewer in. Quite often, the narrative is very theatrical and uncanny, and has a cinematic sense to them. Crutzen entices us into his world of fiction with his location choices, lighting, and props. Crutzen chronicles moments of people who are lost in thought, isolated from themselves and also the viewer. The frame is decontextualised. We have no idea what happens before and after, what is presently going on, or who the people in the frame even are. This gives the viewer many possible narratives, and for each viewer it's a unique experience, as they bring with them their own desires and anxiety, which are then projected into the scene. Michael Kenner was born in 1953 in northwest England. His interest in fine art began after seeing an exhibition by Bill Brandt in 1975 titled The Land. Brandt and many other photographers such as Charles Sheeler and Alfred Stieglitz became a major influence on Michael's work, and in 1976 he fought to get his work seen in the United States. This proved to be quite difficult, and so for the next few years he worked as an assistant and printer while he concentrated on developing his own style. He eventually landed a job with photographer Ruth Bernhard in San Francisco as a printer. Ruth proved to be quite valuable and was a perfectionist for quality with printing. Kenner spent over 10 years working on and perfecting this process and eventually held his first solo exhibition in San Francisco in 1981. Most of his work is large-scale and location-based, and his images concentrate on the interaction between atmospheric conditions of natural landscape, man-made structures, and sculptural mass. His use of painting with light is extraordinary and often photographs long exposures at dawn or night of up to 10 hours in order to achieve the desired atmospheric look in which the human eye cannot see or misses. His simple landscape boasts contrast and points of interest, together with the atmospheric conditions due to his careful choice of lighting and printing, often give the viewers a sense of calming yet sometimes haunting, simplistic beauty. We discussed the work of Alfred Stieglitz earlier in this presentation. Stieglitz and Kenner have a lot of similarities, and both have a love for atmospheric conditions. Stieglitz was a major influence on Kenner, and although Kenner's images possess their own recognisable style, you can see where elements within Kenner's images reflect that of Stieglitz. You can see here on these images of both Kenner and Stieglitz's work where the similarities lie. Both sets of images are very atmospheric, with a calming sense. Both photographers use natural elements, weather conditions, natural light, to produce captivating images. You can see here with these images how Kenner has a particular style that is his and his alone. It's not difficult to recognise one of his amazing images, and they stand out with sheer beauty and uniqueness. With regards to my own practice, I find photography a great outlet for expressing my emotions. Although I'm still finding my own style, I do feel that I am starting to find some consistency as time moves on. I'm very interested in surrealism. I feel this genre allows me to create an outlet for my inner thoughts and feelings, and enables me to become more creative in trying to project my feelings into an image that I feel represents it the best. Michael Kenner is a huge inspiration for my work. I am currently working on a series called Destination Unknown, which is representational of how I feel about life and the many different directions it can take us in. My style is similar to Kenner's and Stieglitz in terms of focus and atmospheric settings, and I feel the images in black and white with a high contrast provoke further thoughts from the viewer. I'm also working on another series which I have named Revisiting the Past, where I go back and meet my younger self. This is a very personal project to me, and one that will hopefully evolve over time. To go back in time is impossible. However, by creating this series, I can revisit certain points of my life and visually make the impossible possible. Thank you for watching my presentation on fine art. I will leave you now with more of my own personal work to view.